Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Please take your seats. We will proceed. Time is pressure. Thank you, and hope you had a great lunch. We will first have a few progress reports before we continue with health and biodiversity. So I will immediately, before we take up where we left off this morning, we will hear progress reports from one co-chair of each of the two contact groups, which was established yesterday. And we will begin with the co-chair of the contact group on item 3 on the monitoring framework. And Mrs. Ann Teller of the EU, you have the floor, please. Microphone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm pleased to report to the plenary on the progress that has been made in the contact group on item 3, the monitoring framework for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, on behalf of myself and of my co-chair, Ezequiel Benitez from Mexico. The contact group has met once last night from 7:45 to 11:10, and we had a full room and 24 parties took the floor. We based our discussion on the non-paper which was produced for this item and issued yesterday by 2 p.m. As we had heard good support in plenary to include the advice of the ATEC, this was also already included in the non-paper. The advice of the ATEC was presented in Substar 26/2/Ad1 document. We started our work focusing on the binary indicators, and based on what was heard in plenary, at the beginning of the contact group, we established 2 friends of the chair for the binary indicators for target 13 and 17. And Taka Chidada of South Africa and Tim Stebala of New Zealand were named as facilitators of this group respectively. As the chair announced today, the friend of the chair on target 13 will meet this evening from 5 to 6 p.m. and one on target 17 will meet from 7 to 8 p.m. The timings are suggested to avoid overlap with other groups. Our work last night began smoothly, and we then had some diverging views on binary questions and answers for target 8 and its sub-questions concerning climate change impacts on biodiversity, and the binary questions and answers for target 9, including on trade issues. We progress with the binary indicators as far as target 9, and we will therefore need another session to continue our work beginning with target 12 tonight. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ann Teller, and all the members of the group. And the second meeting is scheduled for tonight at 8 p.m. Now we will hear a report back from Mr. Osama Abelkawai of Egypt, the co-chair of the contact group on item 5 on synthetic biology. Mr. Abelkawai, you have the floor. Mic to Egypt, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The contact group on synthetic biology met last night from 8 to 10:15 p.m. and successfully undertook the review anticipated in Decision 15/31, paragraph 11. The review considered 4 thematic issues on the basis of Annex 3 and INF Document 6, namely the refined methodology, the need to address capacity building, technology transfer, and knowledge sharing, the further element of the review that need to be taken into account in light of Annex 3 of the document 26/4 and Information Document 6, the way forward for the next intersessional period. The contact group has a robust discussion and found several areas of mutual understanding on the importance of capacity building, technology transfer, knowledge sharing in the context of synthetic biology. The status of the current outcome and future process for horizon scanning remains key issue yet to be resolved. Following a successful first meeting, my co-chair, and I are preparing a non-paper with the support of the Secretariat. The second session of the contact group will consider the non-paper. Finally, I would like to thank my co-chair and the delegate in the room for the prevailing good atmosphere and spirit of understanding which we are confident will help us move forward and be able to advance a conference room paper to the plenary for its consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Abel Kawai, and all the members of the contact group. The contact group will meet for the second time tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., which is scheduled concurrently with the first meeting of the contact group on marine and coastal biodiversity. Please watch the monitors for the room of these contact groups. Now, colleagues, we will continue with the issue of health and biodiversity, the second, session on this. And we have still 26 parties requesting for the floor, 4 IPLCs and major stakeholder groups, and 5 observers on this item. I want again to remind you, speak slowly. Your key points, especially those that you would like to have reflected in the draft recommendations, should be read out in the room and shared, and the full text of your intervention, please send it to the Secretariat ASAP, and they should be uploaded prior to delivery of your statement in this session, but not later than 1 hour of the close of the session. And as I said, this will also ease up the translation to the 6 UN languages. So please upload your statement. So now we return to the speaking list of this contact group, and it's my great pleasure to first ask Sudan to take the floor, followed by the Philippines.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Chair. Sudan would like to add its support to the statement made by Burkina Faso on behalf of the African group. We have created a unique health platform. This brings together all the relevant sectors in that field, plays a role of coordination between all human health and animal health and environmental health practitioners in the country. It's also a way to bring biodiversity into national policies and strategies, and connecting it to health and relevant sectors. In the Ministry of Health, we've also updated strategies and action plans in order to support animal, human and environmental health and integrate perspective of biodiversity. Chair, we support the adoption of the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health as a tool to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and national strategies and action plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sudan. Then we have Philippines, followed by Sweden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Philippines supports the adoption of the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health as contained in Annex 1 to the SABSTA document 26/8. And as indicated in the said recommendation, considers it as an instrument for supporting the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, subject, however, to the national circumstances of the CBD party that will implement the appropriate elements of the said Global Action Plan. It is important to highlight the importance of the One Health approach in the implementation of the Global Action Plan, especially as its interlinkage with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In the ASEAN region, the One Health approach has just been institutionalized, especially with the ASEAN Leaders' Declaration on One Health Initiative last May 2023, and the Philippines will take note of the subsequent documents that will eventually be crafted by the ASEAN member states on One Health and implement them, including the currently evolving ASEAN One Health Joint Action Plan. We appreciate the efforts of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity and the ASEAN Secretariat in convening the member states in carrying out the commitment to the said declaration. To further the implementation of the ASEAN One Health Joint Plan of Action, the Philippines will be working with other ASEAN member states in developing an effective wildlife disease surveillance mechanism that puts biodiversity and environment-related concerns in equal standing with human health and animal health, thus ensuring the well-rounded implementation of One Health. The setting up of the biodiversity-focused wildlife disease surveillance system can also be made part of a monitoring system that is referred to in Enclosure 1 of the Global Plan of Action in SBSTA document 26/8. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. Sweden, followed by Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sweden would like to support the statements made by Belgium and the Netherlands. We thank the Secretariat for the proposed recommendation and the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, and we consider it crucial that we adopt it at COP16. Biodiversity loss and ill health share many common drivers, and Sweden would like to strengthen language on this matter, both in the recommendation and in the Global Action Plan. We note that there is an inconsistency in the use of terminology related to indigenous peoples and local communities and traditional knowledge throughout the documents, and would like to see an alignment using agreed CBD language. Sweden further proposes to address all relevant rights holders, stakeholders, and actors in the invitation to make use of the Global Action Plan in paragraph 4 of the recommendation. Sweden also highlights the connection between this agenda item and issues discussed under agenda item 5 on synthetic biology. We take note of Enclosure 1 and consider it an informal list of possible monitoring elements that require further work and input through a review of parties and relevant stakeholders. Sweden notes that the possible monitoring elements are not linked to the proposed action targets in the Global Action Plan. We also note that the task to develop integrated science-based indicators on biodiversity interlinkages, as requested in Decision 14/4, paragraph 13A, is still pending. Sweden therefore encourages the CBD Secretariat, with support of relevant organizations, to carry out this work and to develop a note describing how these indicators requested in 14/4, as well as the monitoring elements in Enclosure 1, can be used to monitor the implementation of the actions in the Global Action Plan for consideration by SBSTA before COP17. Information from Enclosure 2/Annex 3, as well as relevant indicators from the Global Biodiversity Framework monitoring framework, should be considered in such a note. Sweden will submit suggestions for the recommendation, as well as for improvement of the action plan in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Sweden. Germany, followed by Indonesia. Sorry, no microphone. Please, could you give me a microphone to Germany?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Germany supports the statements made by Belgium, the Netherlands, and Sweden. We would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the document and welcome the participation of the Quadripartite Alliance for One Health in the preparation of the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health. Biodiversity and health of people and all species are interlinked and interdependent. When biodiversity declines, so can our resilience to certain diseases. Due to this very importance of this matter, Germany would like to urge parties to work towards an adoption of the Global Action Plan at COP16 as a means to take action on the biodiversity and health nexus. For this, we would like to propose some minor amendments in order to streamline the Global Action Plan. For example, by welcoming the endorsement by the Quadripartite Alliance for One Health of the definition of One Health as included in COP15 Decision 29, by recognizing the need to address the direct and indirect drivers of change in biodiversity and biodiversity loss as a main action to reduce risk to health while also supporting the implementation of the GBF, by recognizing several human-mediated factors which can lead to the emergence of zoonotic diseases, such as increased use and exploitation of wildlife, unsustainable utilization of natural resources, and accelerated by urbanization and land use change. Recognizing that biodiversity loss and its direct drivers, for example, pollution and climate change, are threatening human and health of the planet, and the climate change in itself is exacerbated by biodiversity loss. With a view to Target 12, we suggest actions to promote and improve green and blue infrastructure in urban areas, as well as connectivity to foster biodiversity and optimize ecosystem services. Lastly, we also recognize the importance of a whole of society and whole of government approach of mainstreaming biodiversity and health, in particular by highlighting the relevant contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities, and recognizing traditional knowledge as an important knowledge system contributing to human and planetary well-being. To include these issues mentioned, we will hand in proposals for amendments in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Germany. Indonesia, followed by Malawi, and then Spain. Indonesia, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia considered the issue of biodiversity and health as very important, as reflected in our engagement on this issue in many forums, including at the pandemic treaty negotiations under the World Health Organizations. Document 8 under item 9, in our views, is very much interlinked with the work being made in the pandemic treaty negotiations. We are of the view that we should pursue synergy between the two. In light of this, Indonesia proposed that we use a precautionary approach in discussing and finalizing the draft decisions, with the view that these two processes not to prejudice each other. Chair, with regard to the draft text, we identified three crucial issues. First, on the issue of access and benefit sharing, in relation with Target 13 and 17, we noticed that the proposed language is not yet in line with what we have discussed and agreed before, including during the Substat 24 under Document 24/7 and COP Decision 15/19. Second, on the issue of One Health, as the definition and scope of One Health is still being discussed in the WHO, our forum should avoid in making decisions which might prejudice the negotiation for any legal binding treaty on this issue. Operative paragraph which might implicitly or explicitly require the One Health approach as a mandatory approach should be avoided. There are certain ideas being contested in WHO. Thus, it is better if we wait for the finalizations of the WHO negotiations. And third, on the issue of equity and common but differentiated responsibility principle, we noticed that the lack of the recognitions of issue of equity and the common but differentiated responsibility, or CBDR, is in the proposed draft decisions. In conclusions, we believe further discussion is needed on the proposed biodiversity and health decisions. In this regard, we support the statement made by Brazil. If we can't finish it here, we should continue discussing it during the COP in Colombia, with the hope that the pandemic treaty negotiations are already concluded by then. Our delegation stands ready to engage and collaborate with other countries on this matter. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Then we go to Malawi, followed by, am I right now? Yes, I hope so. Malawi, followed by Spain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Malawi supports the position that was made by Burkina Faso earlier on behalf of Africa, and welcomes this revised and streamlined version of the draft Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health. We'll go straight to the specific comments on the draft recommendations. With regards to the preamble paragraph on the draft recommendation, which notes the importance given to biodiversity and health interlinkages by other organizations, we would like to also take note of the UNEA resolution on biodiversity and health, and we'll provide draft language for that paragraph. With regards to paragraph 4 of the draft recommendations, in addition to inviting other governments and relevant organizations to make use of the Global Action Plan, we would like to also call on further support for the development and implementation of measures, guidance, and tools for promoting and supporting the mainstreaming of biodiversity and health linkages. We have included this language in paragraph 4 of the draft recommendation and an additional paragraph 7D, which we have introduced and will submit also in writing. With regards to paragraph 4, we note that the draft recommendation requests for several things from parties, but does not call for financial resources to enable the implementation to be done effectively. We have also therefore proposed a new paragraph that reflects this as a draft recommendation to come after paragraph 6. We also have a number of comments on the annex, but I would just like to highlight that what was said earlier on by other parties, that we have noted that there isn't any reference to the 2 protocols of the convention, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and the Nagoya Protocol, which are very important when we talk about issues of biodiversity and health. So with regards to section 3 of the annex on general actions to mainstream biodiversity and health.
Please slow down a little bit, please.
Okay, so to reflect, to address the issues of the 2 protocols of the convention, we have proposed some additional paragraphs with regards to section 3 that address the issues of the 2 protocols and to be able to be mainstreamed as well when we talk about issues of biodiversity and health. When it comes to the monitoring elements, we feel that this has not comprehensively taken into account the actions that have been proposed in the annex from paragraph 14. So we have made some recommendation to the draft recommendation in paragraph 8, which calls for more work to be done on the indicators, and we have included language in there that addresses this. Finally, with regards to the targeted messages for mainstreaming biodiversity into the health sector, we feel that we have missing one important message, which focuses on the contribution of genetic resources and DSI for health-related research and development. So we also provide language for this. Other than that, we feel that this action plan is timely, and it's a welcome one for Malawi. Thank you.
Thank you, Malawi. Then we go to Spain, followed by Malaysia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Spain would like to thank the Secretariat for updating the Global Action Plan on biodiversity and health. I'd like to highlight the importance of recognizing that loss of biodiversity and the deterioration of health share direct and indirect drivers. The action plan makes a significant contribution to the implementation of the global framework and the One Health approach. Therefore, Spain would like to underline the relevance of approving the Global Action Plan. In particular, the raft of actions proposed in Annex 1 to document Subster 26.8. We welcome the messages aimed at the health sector, as set out in Annex 2 to the same document. Nevertheless, we would make the following proposals. Keeping biodiversity in a good state of health is a key element for adaptation and mitigation to climate change. Therefore, we suggest reflecting this recognition in the proposed action plan. General actions need to promote integration of the links between biodiversity and health in sectoral strategies, in particular for those sectors which affect biodiversity the most. To achieve this, targets 14, 15 and 18 should consider, as tangible measures, the development of materials which facilitate the integration of biodiversity and health, specifically for each key sector. Finally, Spain believes that the action plan is essential for urban areas, as high population densities there expose their populations to unsanitary conditions. Target 11 then should drive an improvement in biodiversity, green and blue infrastructures, and urban connectivity to benefit health of the population as a whole in a just manner, in particular including the most vulnerable social groups, and thereby contribute to reducing social inequalities. We have sent our proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Spain. Malaysia, followed by Finland.
Madam Chair, as biodiversity is a key determinant of health, mitigation approaches are pivotal compared to adaptation strategies in minimizing the health impacts of biodiversity degradation. Based on Annex 1 of the document, Malaysia believes that this revised draft of Global Action on Biodiversity and Health will contribute to mitigation efforts, including preserving biodiversity, reducing environmental and land degradation, and minimizing pollution, over solely focusing on measuring the health impact and adapting to biodiversity degradation. Monitoring process indicators such as the existence of policies related to biodiversity preservation is equally important as monitoring impact indicators, such as disease burden related to biodiversity degradation. Awareness of the link between biodiversity and health should also be directed towards stakeholders and industrial players who directly impact in biodiversity and therefore health. In the curricula for medical, health, and environmental management professionals, incorporating the interlinkage between biodiversity and health into the curricula of other disciplines directly involved in biodiversity preservation is crucial. Malaysia therefore supports the adoption of the revised draft Global Action on Biodiversity and Health. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. Finland, then followed by Nigeria, and then Austria. Finland, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, giving me the floor, and dear distinguished colleagues. Finland welcomes the Biodiversity and Health Action Plan. We stress the need to conclude our work and fulfill our mandate according to the Decisions 14/4, Para 13b and c, and development of Global Action Plan. And we regret that we could not conclude this task at the COP15. We need to adopt the Global Action Plan at COP16. We need to continue to collaborate with main actors and relevant stakeholders to contribute to the implementation of the Global Action Plan. We welcome the approach, and it is crucial to tackle, for example, antimicrobial resistance, promote safe life, and work together to enhance mainstreaming and to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, like 3 health, 7 food, 13 climate, 14 land, and 15 sea and marine, among others. Finland would suggest, as many others, that we streamline and concentrate on the Global Action Plan outlined in Annex 1. And we have concerns regarding the relations of the 2 enclosures in relation to the Global Action Plan. Therefore, we suggest structural changes. We suggest that the enclosures are deleted as such because they are already included in the INF documents. We propose to delete enclosure 2 and make a reference to biodiversity and health interlinkages in the draft recommendation and referring CBD/20/IM/3. Regarding the draft recommendation, we support, as our colleagues in Belgium, with some addition to regarding the interlinkages of the Global Action Plan on how to integrate biodiversity into pandemic recovery measures. Chair, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the request on knowledge and awareness on biodiversity, access to medicines and vaccines, and at the same time increased people's visits to protected and other natural areas. This shows that access to green and blue spaces from a broad health perspective is crucial. We particularly point out to the multiple benefits of biodiversity for limiting the proliferation of autoimmune diseases and mental health problems, especially as concerns youth and children. In consultation with the WHO, we would explore the development of an online information platform to collect knowledge and experience on interlinked biodiversity and health policies and actions, including, among others,
Thank you,
case studies.
Finland. I think your time is over. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much.
Kiitos, kiitos. Then we continue with Nigeria, followed by Austria.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. Nigeria supports the statement made by Burkina Faso on behalf of the African Group regarding biodiversity and health. Nigeria would like to thank the Secretariat for the impressive work on the CBD-Live/26/8 document and for improving the global plan of action on biodiversity and health. Biodiversity and health are intricately linked in several ways. It is fundamental to maintaining the health of ecosystems, which in turn directly and indirectly imparts general ecosystem health in numerous ways. Nigeria is a country with cornucopia of natural resources and stewards of the well-being of our people. We are committed to championing ambitious actions for supporting initiatives that will foster collaborative action to safeguard biodiversity for the prosperity and health of not just our country, but also of Africa's current and future generations. Nigeria recognizes the importance of nature-based solutions, inter alia, in addressing biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. Therefore, we join the call for capacity building and strengthening for disease surveillance as it relates to human health and biodiversity. Improved biosecurity measures based on One Health approach, knowledge and expertise sharing between developed and developing countries, increased collaborations of biodiversity and health-related research. In conclusion, Nigeria supports the recommendations proposed in document CBD/Spista/26/8, including the adoption of the draft Global Plan of Action on Biodiversity and Health. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. Austria, followed by Uganda.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Marina. For Austria, it's critical that this SBSTA finalizes the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health and recommends to the COP to adopt the Global Action Plan and calls for its rapid implementation. Having learned our lessons from the COVID pandemic, we stress the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity and ecosystem services into the health sector. Even more, it's important that the interlinkages of biodiversity and health are integrated also in other relevant sectors, just to mention the forest sector. We also stress the importance of cooperation between biodiversity and health sector at global level, in particular with the WHO, but also, and maybe even more important, is cooperation at the national level. We therefore strongly support the draft recommendations on this. Given the fact that we had already many very rich and constructive discussions on the Global Action Plan that resulted in the revised draft we have on the table now, we are prepared to recommend the gap as contained in document 26/8, Annex 1. Madam Chair, the there are interlinkages between this agenda item and many other work streams under the Convention. Here, I in particular want to underline the potential linkages between the GAP and the Horizon scanning process under synthetic biology, as also referred to by Belgium and Sweden. We support the proposal that acknowledges these interlinkages to be included in the draft recommendation. Like Finland, we find it important that knowledge on and experience in interlinked biodiversity and health policies and actions is collected and made available for parties and all interested groups. This could also facilitate capacity building and thus support the implementation of the Global Action Plan. We have a text proposal on this to be included in the recommendation for a COP decision. Finally, we support the proposal from the Netherlands Youth Delegation to include children whenever youth is mentioned in this document. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you, Gabriele. Then we go to Uganda and followed by Democratic Republic of Congo.
Thanks, Chair. Uganda supports statement by Burkina Faso on behalf of Africa. Uganda acknowledges with appreciation the information in the documents prepared for Agenda Item 9 on biodiversity and health, including the Global Action Plan on Diversity and Health. This forms a good basis for discussion. Uganda calls on the integration of One Health approach while supporting research on biodiversity and health interlinkages to address knowledge gaps, access to scientific evidence, indigenous science, and good practices. Uganda further calls for collaboration and capacity building activities to support parties in the uptake and implementation of the Global Action Plan, including by convening regional workshops and facilitating dialogue while raising awareness at all levels. Uganda supports the designation of focal points on biodiversity and health, supports the endorsement of target messages for mainstreaming biodiversity in the health sector, and support for implementation of National Action Plan on biodiversity and health. Chair, we have uploaded this statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Thank you for you having uploading your statement. I think everybody should have done it by now, those who are even coming now after this, your interventions. And it's a great pleasure to give the microphone now to Democratic Republic of Congo, followed by South Africa, and then Zimbabwe.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for affording me the floor. The Democratic Republic of Congo backs a statement made by Burkina Faso on behalf of the Africa Group. The DRC remains convinced that the loss of biodiversity, climate change, and threats to human health, such as epidemics and pandemics of zoonotic origin, pollution and other natural factors are all closely interlinked. RDC therefore welcomes the updated version of the draft Global Plan of Action for Biodiversity and Health and wishes to pay tribute to the palpable progress made on this agenda item. We'd also urge all the other parties and stakeholders to work in a constructive manner to consolidate this tool to ensure that we're in a position to adopt it during COP16. The DRC is pleased to see the new version of the Global Plan of Action, which recognizes the role of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity for the prevention, reduction, and management of risks of disease, and therefore takes into account a number of elements of the Kunming-Montreal framework, especially those elements which are most relevant to human health. This is true of risk reduction of the spread of pathogenic agents within the framework of efforts aimed at ensuring that the gathering, harvesting, and use of wild species is sustainable. The DRC also welcomes the explicit reference to the in-cell health as an element to be taken into account as part of action aimed at guaranteeing that the benefits of biodiversity and health are achieved. The incorporation of biodiversity in health and integrating health into biodiversity is something which is worthy of good international cooperation. The same is true of knowledge sharing, and we have to take care of the ethical aspects of transparency and traceability, in addition to comments that we already heard by Burkina Faso on behalf of the Afro Group. And the DRC believes that it would be good to stress the fact that we need to make this more effective, i.e., that we have to underscore the areas in which action is necessary by using simple wording which would be intelligible to all and which should cover a great variety of different national situations. We stand ready to continue work on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then we go to South Africa, followed by Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Burkina Faso on behalf of the African Group. South Africa welcomes the work undertaken by the Secretariat in collaboration with the quadripartite Alliance on One Health towards updating the draft Global Action Plan and targeted messages. South Africa welcomes the updated draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health as a useful plan for leveraging biodiversity and health interlinkages and for strengthening the integration of biodiversity into One Health approaches. South Africa further notes that the biodiversity and health interlinkages cut across all targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and therefore welcomes the effort to align the Global Action Plan with the GBF. South Africa supports the elements of the draft decision, including designating a national focal point on biodiversity and health to enhance national coordination. South Africa is of the view that the draft Global Action Plan can benefit from further review by parties and requests that the Secretariats facilitate the further review and updating. Such updates should consider, amongst others, the following elements that are either missing or need strengthening. Firstly, a link to other multilateral environment agreements and conventions, as indicated in the African Group statement, such as the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna and Flora, International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands of International Importance, and Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of wild animals, with specific decisions and resolutions on biodiversity and health-related issues. Secondly, access and benefit sharing and digital sequence information on genetic resources for which no voluntary actions have been proposed in the current draft. The role of biosecurity to biodiversity and health as indicated in the African Group statement. Interlinkages with the One Welfare approach that promotes the direct and indirect links of animal welfare to human welfare and environmentally friendly animal keeping systems. Interlinkages with the One Food initiative aimed at implementing a One Health approach to sustainable food systems. And then lastly, support for research on neglected zoonotic diseases as they mainly affect poor communities. Furthermore, given the links with all the targets of the GBF, South Africa recommends that the Global Environmental Facility, including the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, supports projects aimed at enhancing biodiversity and health linkages. South Africa also supports capacity building to assist parties on how they can use the Global Action Plan as part of the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, including through regional workshops as well as dialogues. South Africa will submit detailed textual responses to this, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Then we have Zimbabwe, followed by Egypt.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to contribute. Zimbabwe supports the statement read by Burkina Faso on Agenda Item 9 on biodiversity and health on behalf of the Africa Group. Chair, Zimbabwe supports the proposed recommendations, including adoption of the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, as well as further improvements suggested, especially on addressing healthy issues affecting IPLCs and other vulnerable groups. We believe the draft recommendations are well aligned to the revised One Health Joint Plan of Action for 2022 to 2026 that was launched by the quadripartite, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the United Nations Environment Programme, the World Health Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health, founded as OIE. Chair, let me also bring your attention to the fact that in preamble, paragraph 6 of decision 15/29, the One Health definition was not discussed by the COP, serving as meeting of parties to the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols, and it is important that this matter be given attention ahead of COP16. At the moment, we believe the general understanding is the use of the definition provided by the One Health high-level expert panel as stated in preamble, paragraph 5 of decision 15/29. Zimbabwe also believes if resources are secured to implement actions proposed, it will help us move forward and make significant progress on this important matter. Zimbabwe has already uploaded the statement. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Then we have Egypt, followed by Somalia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Knowing you, I'll be slow and short. Otherwise, I have to face trouble. Well, first of all, like many African interventions here, all of us, we are supporting a statement given already by Burkina Faso on the issue of biodiversity and health. Madam Chair, the interlinkages between biodiversity and health are well known and well documented, but they, in the document itself, they need to be aligned with the biodiversity language, otherwise we will keep talking different languages. That's why issue of communication languages among all of the different organizations at all different levels need to be streamed up to a great extent. Yes, indeed, we are in favor of one health approach, and we would love to establish national focal point for biodiversity and health. But capacity building is another issue that was already mentioned by many groups. Madam Chair, what about the cost of implementation of this proposed global action? How much it will cost? And what are the benefits? Can we have benefit sharings? Our colleagues already talked about DSI, for example, but until now, everything is still floating to a great extent. From our experience in Egypt, for example, when we had avian flu some years ago and COVID, all of the genetic resources or material were taken from Egypt and they were used, and we have to pay for all of this. Where the benefit sharing? And that's why the whole issue about biodiversity and health, we need a cross-cutting indicator that could consider all of this, especially when we are going to face other future, not only problem, but new conventions like pandemic convention that's coming very soon. So again and again, we keep saying the best approach is preparing ethical indicators that cover equity and fairness, respect of indigenous people and their right, inclusivity and participation, intergeneration equity, ecological integration, ethical treat to non-human species, sustainability, cultural and global cooperation, and solidarity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Egypt. Then we have Somalia followed by Burundi.
Good afternoon. Somalia will appreciate the dedicated work done by the Secretariat and the respective delegates on Agenda 9, Biodiversity and Health. We value your expertise and guidance. Somalia's livelihood and economic is greatly dependent on nature and its natural capital: land, rangeland, rivers, and marine resources. Climate change, recurring droughts, water scarcity, resulted food insecurity, which jeopardizes ecosystems' health and services for good human health and productive livelihood. There is growing national and international concern about the health consequences of biodiversity loss, which have significant and direct impact on human health. Moreover, the ecosystems are no longer adequate to meet social needs, including health. In that regard, we propose the access and share equal right for benefits, knowledge sharing, and capacity building. Also, we propose for one healthy approach to ensure sustainable balance and optimize the health of the people, animals, and ecosystem. Somalia supports and will adopt the effective implementation of the relevant protocols and frameworks of integrating biodiversity and health measures. Finally, Somalia supporting the statement given by Burkina Faso on behalf of Africa. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Burundi. Then we have, Somalia. Then we have Burundi followed by Tanzania.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for having afforded me the floor. Burundi wishes to back the statement made by the Africa Group on biodiversity and health presented by Burkina Faso. We also recognize the role of traditional knowledge associated with biological resources in providing researchers with information to help develop new medicines and new vaccines. We therefore support the recommendations aimed at encouraging the sharing of benefits derived from the use of biodiversity, including the sharing of vaccines, medicines, and other pharmaceutical products based on biological resources, as well as capacity building, knowledge sharing, and associated benefits for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity for the health of our populations. I thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Tanzania followed by France.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tanzania supports the contribution of South Africa, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Burkina Faso, Somalia, Burundi, and other African countries on the action plan of mainstreaming biodiversity into healthy system. Madam Chair, Tanzania considered the action to mainstream biodiversity and healthy linkage into national policy, strategy, and program is very crucial, since health is a core amenity to human life, and food certainly are coming from various biodiversity. Therefore, there is a need of making sure the food we eat means biodiversity are safe and healthy. This can be possible by promoting a healthy agriculture system through agroecology, which usually use natural resource-based practice, which are the most means of biodiversity conservation. In light of the above, Tanzania is recommending to add into Part 15/14 of communication of this agenda the actions of promoting the natural and healthy way of crop production for the health of human as well as the well-being of biodiversity itself. This should be the most action to be taken during the implementation of this action plan of the mainstreaming biodiversity into health. If the method will be successfully practiced by the whole world, the CBD slogans of living in harmony with nature will prevail in every place. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Tanzania. Then we have France, followed by Russian Federation.
Je vous remercie, Madame.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. France wishes to back the statements made by Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, Germany and Austria. France wishes to pay tribute to the document and its annexes and is pleased to see that the Quadripartite Alliance for the One Health approach has participated in its elaboration. We expect with a great deal of tension the conclusion of Subset 26 for final adoption close to 6 years after the parties to the CBD asked the CBD to develop a plan of action a few years before the COVID-19 pandemic. France firmly defends the One Health approach, which is mentioned in Section C of the Global Kunming-Montreal Framework for Biodiversity, and welcomes the closer link forged between the Global Biodiversity Framework and its monitoring. This link could be further strengthened as far as indicators are concerned, as was proposed by Sweden. Now, we'd like to echo what was said by Egypt, and we wish to remind you that scientific studies believe that the economic cost for the prevention of pandemics is 100 times less than actually dealing with such scourges. We will suggest a number of elements to include these documents, and we wish to stress the need to take into account animal health and to avoid an approach which is solely based on humans. One Health has been recognized by IPBES as an example of cooperation of nature-based solutions. We have also been party to the elaboration of a global framework which is based on data. Now, dealing with things upstream, planetary health and so forth, everything has been considered to be positive elements by local knowledge holders, especially within the framework of IPBES. Their work is worthy of recognition by our subsidiary body. And finally, France wishes to underscore the importance of health. Health is the primary concern of our populations in 196 countries. One Health aimed at balancing and optimizing the health of individuals, of animals and ecosystems could serve as our new slogan and banner. The global plan of action which has been proposed would contribute to this. Thank you.
Merci, France. Then we have Russian Federations, followed by Namibia.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Now, the link between biodiversity and health is undoubtedly an extremely important topic, rightly enjoying a great deal of attention. The Russian delegation would like to focus on a number of key concerns in this field. Firstly, a number of the provisions used in the draft program of action, as well as the use of definitions and concepts, go beyond the mandate of the convention. For example, sustainable healthy diets, planetary health, earth systems, and others. We advocate the use of agreed concepts and language only in draft submissions. Also, on the issue of addressing dietary patterns, we would like to point out that the FAO is a responsible international legal body and instrument, and direct interference in its mandate is, of course, unacceptable. We consider it inappropriate to include the list of potential guidelines and tools proposed in paragraph 8 of Annex 1, as a substantial part of them do not enjoy international agreement. We believe that the actions relevant to paragraph 20 should be placed in a separate column and further elaborated. We back the positions which were voiced by a number of developing states regarding the importance of more in-depth work on the issues of access and of benefit sharing. The Russian delegation was disappointed by the fact that the proposed draft action plan could not serve as a full-fledged basis for further negotiations and will require further fine-tuning. Thank you.
Thank you, Russia. Then we have Namibia, followed by Kenya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Namibia aligns itself with the intervention made by Burkina Faso on behalf of Africa and support those made by our fellow African states who spoke before us and the distinguished delegate from Indonesia and Russian Federation. Namibia would like to appreciate the work done by the Secretariat on this document and those related to Global Action Plan. However, we would like to bring to your attention to your attention gaps and key issues that, in our view, missing in this document. Firstly, we would like to highlight that the draft Global Action Plan was not adopted in the last SABSTA 24 because it does not take into account issues of equity and need for fair and equitable benefit sharing. As such, the Secretariat was specifically mandated to address issues of equity and benefit sharing while revising the draft in consultation with the quadripartite organization in terms of para 5A of the COP decision 15/29. We notice that the action mentioned here in Annex 1 of the item document does not distinguish actions needs to be taken by developing countries and developed countries. Also, we do not see concrete action mentioned in action area related to access and benefit sharing. This means the quadripartite and whoever contributed to this document have not fulfilled the mandate of para 5A of decision 15/29, as well as para 2A of the same decision. Furthermore, the draft Global Action Plan referred to IPCC and EBIS reports, but does not reflect the call for new and additional resources for developing countries made in the same report. We are of the considered view that the WHO Pandemic Treaty and the World Bank financing conditionalities can de facto convert the voluntary action mentioned in the annexure to de facto obligations. The proposal here can also legitimize several contested points in the WHO Pandemic Treaty negotiation, including prioritization of wildlife surveillance over other holistic measures of specific management. This could very well prejudice the negotiation at the WHO, which may conclude in the coming days before COP16. Sorry. In this light, we wish for the gaps and issues to be considered in this document in an informed manner, and we further propose that the discussion on this document should be deferred to the next SABSTA, taking into account ongoing discussion on matters in other fora, such as WHO. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Then we have Kenya, followed by China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Kenya is in support of the statement made by Africa Group that was presented by Burkina Faso, and we align ourselves to parties supporting the adoption of the Global Action Plan. Kenya thus welcomes recommendations captured in SABSTA 26/8, and in particular Part 4 recommendation contained in decisions 13.6 and 14.4 that integrate biodiversity and health interlinkages into national biodiversity strategies and action plan in line with Section C of the framework, taking the elements of the Global Action Plan into account. We also welcome the request to the Executive Secretary to facilitate, in collaboration with partners, capacity building activities to support parties in the uptake and implementation of the Global Action Plan, including by convening regional workshops and facilitating dialogues in collaboration with inter-alia organizations, members of the Quadripartite Alliance on One Health and other multilateral environmental agreements. Kenya proposes additional text to paragraph 6 of the recommendations to read as follows. Invites parties, other governments, relevant organizations, donors, and relevant financial institutions to support capacity building and avail adequate resources in a timely manner for the effective implementation of the Global Action Plan. The proposed text is contained in the statement already uploaded. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. Then we have China, followed by India and Ghana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China thanks the Secretariat for its efforts in preparing the Global Plan of Action on Biodiversity and Health. We welcome the relevant discussions on biodiversity and health. We note that during Substar 24 and the second phase of COP15, we've spent a great deal of time to discuss this topic. We hope that during this meeting, all parties can stay positive and constructive and facilitate the sooner adoption of the action plan so that there's more time in the implementation phase. We want to raise a few proposals on the current text. First, we hope that the action plan should be action-oriented and stay concise and clear. Its content should fall within the mandate of CBD. Second, some terms in the text should be further clarified, such as planetary health, sustainable healthy diets, etc. Third, in order to better inform implementation, what actions are needed, we advise the adjustment done on the table of page 11. It should first describe specific actions, followed by corresponding targets in the framework. This is to make sure that the action plan is actually action-oriented. In addition, monitoring elements should be categorized to ensure greater clarity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. India followed by Ghana.
Thank you, Chair. India acknowledges and appreciates the extensive efforts and consultations undertaken by the Secretariat in the preparation of the revised Global Draft Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health as a follow-up to COP Decision 15/29. We welcome integrating biodiversity considerations into One Health approaches, but would like to urge the Secretariat for further collaborative work in this regard. On biodiversity and human health, despite the multiplicity of policies, goals, and targets that address health, environmental, and developmental challenges, we are still far from achieving their stated objectives. There is a need for a more comprehensive, multidisciplinary, and pluralistic strategy for the health sector. We believe that traditional knowledge-based health systems, along with culturally sensitive and locally appropriate approaches, as per the national circumstances and priorities, can play an important role in this context. It is imperative to develop clear, actionable strategies that are aligned with the principles of One Health and holistic approaches. These strategies would prioritize collaboration across various disciplines and sectors, fostering synergies for maximizing the co-benefits for biodiversity and health. Inequities in global health can be addressed effectively only if the revised global plan on biodiversity and health results in strengthening health systems in developing and underdeveloped countries. Unless the third objective of the Convention, that is facilitating fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of biological resources and DSI, are addressed, establishing direct linkage between biodiversity and health may pose challenges. Further, unless benefits flow back to conserves and the concerned communities from the utilization of the biological resources, it would be difficult to make progress in the health sector in developing and underdeveloped countries, including mega biodiverse countries. Another equally important issue is the need for providing not only new and additional resources, but also access to the flow of financial resources and other elements of means of implementation from developed to the developing countries, as mentioned in the Convention. This would be necessary for establishing a robust framework for an integrated and holistic approach on biodiversity and health. It is only by adopting such an integrated approach that the interrelated issues can be dealt with and resolved effectively in sync with three key objectives of the Convention. It is equally important to mention here that several new concepts and terminologies which have been introduced in the document call for in-depth deliberations and for defining the same on the basis of scientific principles for arriving at unanimity in understanding before we can proceed further. Before concluding, we would like to state that the issues highlighted by us and by other earlier speakers from Brazil require extensive discussions and unanimous resolution before Substar can proceed to recommend for adoption of the draft Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health by COP16, as mentioned in the recommendations of the document CBD/Substar/26/8. We will be submitting our comments on the draft recommendations separately. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. And then the last party to take the floor is Ghana. Ghana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ghana supports the submission made by Burkina Faso on behalf of Africa and commends the Secretariat for the work done on the current plan. We would, however, like to note that the current plan could be improved to adequately address the limitations of current methods in reversing biodiversity loss and managing health crises. The plan also glosses over the crucial need for capacity building and additional investment in innovation and research. Also, Target 6 discusses the identification of knowledge gaps and the consideration of adverse impacts of IAS. We need to think more practically about elimination strategies, including through the use of innovations for the management of IAS that have an impact on health. We would like to see a clear multi-sectoral strategy to control and eradicate IAS that are directly responsible for infectious diseases and biodiversity loss. We suggest adding a fourth point: promote the implementation of a multi-sectoral strategy to manage and eradicate IAS directly responsible for infectious diseases and biodiversity loss through traditional and innovative approaches. Under Target 7 in the list of actions, we need to explore biological alternatives that can be developed to fight disease vectors while reducing the use of chemical pollutants. We welcome the mention of biotechnology, including biosafety regulations, as a source of potential tools and solutions for biodiversity and health challenges. We would, however, encourage the inclusion of capacity building in that section as a critical opportunity that may be accessed by low and middle income countries. Also, action points on targets 13 and 17 have been merged. We believe that these are two distinct issues that should not be handled together. Under target 17, the suggestion of risk assessment in a multidisciplinary manner, we believe, creates an opportunity for non-scientific approaches to be included in the same measure as scientific ones. Madam Chair, in conclusion, we call for close collaboration between the CBD and biodiversity-related conventions, the Quadripartite Organization on One Health, particularly the UNEP, to follow up on UNIA Resolution 5.1 on the Animal Welfare Environment Sustainable Development Nexus to ensure that we achieve the benefits of biodiversity on health and deal with the threats to biodiversity loss and its subsequent effects on human health. I therefore call on parties to work towards adopting the plan at COP16. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghana. And then I overlooked, please, European Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The European Union supports the statements made by Belgium, Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, Spain, Finland, Austria, and France, and we would like to further stress a few points. Mainstreaming of biodiversity, including in the health sector, is crucial for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We welcome the proposed targeted messages for mainstreaming biodiversity into the health sector included in Annex 2. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown how important nature is for our physical and mental health. It has shown the urgent need to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use and manage ecosystems. For a sustainable and inclusive recovery, we need enhanced collaboration and cooperation on health and biodiversity interlinkages. Hence, we stress the importance of the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health included in Annex 1, which has been under preparation for quite some time. We find the documents prepared by the Secretariat are a very good basis, and we are looking forward to a constructive discussion toward the adoption of the Global Action Plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, EU. Then we go now to IPLC and major groups. And I also remind you all that after these interventions, we need to have support from the parties. So please start then to wave so we could have the countries noted, duly noted. So I start with IPLC's 2 and 4 minutes intervention. IPLC 221, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a statement on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. We, the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, are mindful of the reciprocal relationship between biodiversity and health. we remind parties and all stakeholders that biodiversity destruction negatively impacts people's health. As we recently saw with COVID-19, Mother Earth developed its detoxification mechanism to refix itself. In this reality, biodiversity and health discussions are critical to indigenous peoples whose livelihoods are intrinsically connected to Mother Nature. Therefore, actions taken on biodiversity and health at all levels should respect, recognize, and uphold land tenure, territories and resources, customary law, and traditional knowledge systems. This is ensured with the implementation of the indigenous peoples' free, prior, and informed consent as enshrined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Articles 32 and 24, particularly to enjoy full realization on use and access to indigenous medicines and food sovereignty. In this regard, IFB would like to put forward some recommendations in the text. In the preamble, paragraph 5, after the role of, we would like to add intercultural, to read intercultural education. In paragraph 6, at the end of paragraph, we would like to add including indigenous doctors and healers. In paragraph 3A, after the global action plan, we would add with the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. In paragraph 3B, after lessons learned among biodiversity, we suggest to add indigenous and traditional doctors or healers. And in the same paragraph, after health-related agencies, to add traditional and indigenous health system. In paragraph 4, after the relevant organization, we suggest deleting the word including and add indigenous peoples, local communities, to continue with women and youth. In paragraph 6, after relevant organizations, we suggest to add indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. And in the same paragraph, after relevant financial institution to support, we would like to add culturally appropriate capacity build to continue capacity building. And in 7B, at the end of the paragraph, we would like to add traditional knowledge, natural indicators on holistic natural medicine and biodiversity. In 7C, after interlinkages at all, we would suggest to delete the national or international to add at all levels, including good practices. And in 8B, we suggest the addition at the end of the paragraph, including indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. And in 8C, after to raise awareness at all levels, we would like to add with appropriate tools, means, and languages. And finally, at 8D, we suggest to add at the end of the paragraph, including contamination, waste, and chemical pollution. IFP 6 parties support in our submissions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ramson. Any support for this intervention, please raise your hand. I don't see where they are from, but anyway. Guatemala, DRC, South Africa, Namibia. Yeah, hopefully we got everybody. Thank you, that's proved. And please submit your statement if you haven't done so. Then we have women, 257, please.
Thanks, Chair. My name is Alejandra from Women for Biodiversity, a member of the CBD Women Caucus. Biodiversity loss has a profound impact on women's health and the communities they are from. They often face greater health risks due to their roles as primary caregivers, leading to increased exposure to unpredictable weather patterns, poor air quality, and extreme weather events. Additionally, biodiversity and health degradation affects livelihoods and income, which can exacerbate political conflict and social tensions within communities. Women, as key agents on community cohesion and family stability, bear the burden of these increasing pressures. To mitigate these impacts, it is essential to address the unique challenges faced by women and girls. This approach should aim to empower women as educators, caregivers, holders of knowledge, and agents of social change to improve mitigation and adaptation policy interventions in the context of biodiversity and health. For that, we suggest the following modifications in document Substat 26/8. Consistently refer to indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth in Annex 1, Paragraph 2, and 5A, 11D, and Annex 2 as appropriate. In recommendations, in Paragraph 8D, after multilateral environmental, add and human rights. In Annex 1, in Paragraph 11A, to add sexual and reproductive health, after a comprehensive understanding of health and well-being, including physical. At the paragraph 11D bis, considering the designation of a national gender liaison focal point on biodiversity and public health, who, among other tasks, can report on the contributions and needs of women and girls in relation to environmental stewardship and gender equality. In Enclosure 1, paragraph C, to add and impacts on after roles. We would like the Chair to ask parties to show support for our considerations. Thank you.
Thank you, women. Support for this intervention. Could you please raise your hand? Colombia, Mexico. Thank you. And I can't see who you are. Netherlands. Okay, thank you. Well done. And then the next intervention comes from Youth 705.
Thank you, Chair. We support the statement made by the IIFB and the Women's Caucus. The Global Youth Biodiversity Network emphasizes that consideration on children and youth are of paramount importance in matters of biodiversity and health. Not only are we at heightened risk of adverse health impacts from biodiversity loss, but also not structurally integrated in decision-making bodies or processes on environmental matters that impact our lives, future, and the realization of our right to health and right to a safe, clean, and healthy environment. We recognize that biodiversity underpins all dimensions of human health and well-being, including mental and emotional health, as well as cultural integrity. Children and youth are among those who bear the greatest mental health burdens from the planetary crisis. We welcome in this regard the inclusion of action to address eco-anxiety, among other impacts, in the Global Action Plan. We welcome that children are rightfully acknowledged as a vulnerable group as the adverse impact of biodiversity loss on health disproportionately affects the ability of the children to be born, grow, develop, and thrive physically and mentally in Annexes 1 and 2. However, they are not recognized in the Global Action Plan voluntary action on stakeholders' participation. They are also missing from action on health impact assessment, advocacy tools, and closing knowledge gaps. We therefore support the proposal by the Netherlands for children to be listed alongside youth in all instances because they are of different age category with different implications with respect to health vulnerabilities and participation needs. Through a global youth consultation on biodiversity and health conducted in January 2024, participating young people put forward a number of key ways to ensure the meaningful participation of children and youth in decision-making and implementation on biodiversity and health. This includes institutionalizing children and young participation in developing and implementing plans on biodiversity and health. integrating children's rights in such plan and policies, recognizing and supporting youth-led initiative at the intersection of biodiversity, health, and well-being, and engaging youth experts, among others. As there are many ways to engage young people in such processes, we make the following text proposal to paragraph 11E of the Global Action Plan on the designation of National Youth Liaison Focal Point on Biodiversity and Public Health. To the beginning of paragraph 11A, we propose to add, taking steps to ensure the full and effective participation of children and youth in decision-making and action on biodiversity and health, including by. And the paragraph continues as it is. We call for parties to support this proposal. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth, and support for this intervention. The Netherlands, Sweden. Thank you. Then we will have, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I just want to note 8 intervention more, and then we are done. And I will, my pleasure to give the floor to CBD Alliance, 273.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm from the Third World Network, speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance. We thank the Secretariat for the work done on this agenda item, but regrettably, we have 2 concerns remaining. Firstly, the draft Global Action Plan does not satisfy fully the mandate of Decision 15/29, which in paragraph 5A asks for revisions to address issues of equity and fair and equitable benefit sharing. We recall that Substar 24 asked for the revised plan because the initial draft did not take into account socioeconomic inequalities and health inequities existing between developed and developing countries, particularly the inequitable access to medicines, vaccines, and diagnostics laid bare by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the importance of access and benefit sharing systems in biodiversity and health interlinkages. We are concerned that these gaps remain unaddressed. We are also concerned that the draft Global Action Plan refers to the IPCC and IPBES reports, but doesn't reflect their call for new and additional resources for developing countries. Similarly, no concrete measures are suggested in the action area relating to access and benefit sharing under Annex 1. Further, the understanding of the One Health approach advocated by the Global Action Plan is skewed towards expanding the scope of surveillance. It's not clear what are the equitable interventions one must undertake once problems are identified through surveillance. Secondly, the Global Action Plan and its contents are interlinked to the ongoing negotiations at the WHO for a pandemic treaty, and this has 2 implications. First, the action plan could legitimize several contested concepts and provisions under discussion at WHO, including One Health and wildlife surveillance. Second, the pandemic treaty has proposals that could convert this voluntary action plan under the CBD into de facto obligations. Therefore, we call upon parties to postpone discussions on this agenda item to the next Substar, where we will have more information about the ongoing negotiations in the WHO and its results. If discussions are not deferred, we propose the following. In paragraph 1, change adopts to takes note of. In paragraph 4, after as appropriate, add respecting self-determined national priorities. In paragraph 6, after capacity building, add in developing countries, and after implementation, add of actions addressing biodiversity and health interlinkages at the national level. In paragraph 8b, after parties, add upon requests. We have more text suggestions for Annexes 1 and 2, and will submit this in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, CBD Alliance. And any support for this intervention? Brazil and Argentina and Namibia and Indonesia. Okay, thank you. Egypt. Thank you. Then we go to observers, 2 minutes intervention, and the first intervention is UNEP 205.
Thank you, Chair. UNEP welcomes the draft action plan on biodiversity and health and the draft decision prepared by the Secretariat. We believe the plan provides a unique opportunity for parties to promote the whole of government and whole of society approach for the mainstreaming of biodiversity, not just in the health sector, but in multiple other sectors in line with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Human health and well-being matter to everyone. The plan provides an excellent entry point to which other sectors can support collaborative action where different mandates align for greater impact. We urge parties not to miss this unique opportunity. The plan has been long in the making. Even if some parties believe it is not perfect, to have nothing would be a horribly missed opportunity. Let the perfect not be the enemy of the good. Furthermore, we encourage the Convention to establish a mechanism to periodically review and update the plan based on emerging knowledge and evidence, as well as on lessons learned from its implementation and synergies with other mandates. The Biodiversity and Health Action Planning process inspired Germany to establish the Nature for Health Multi-Partner Trust Fund with a generous contribution of €50 million to support the implementation of the plan in 18 countries. It has started. UNEP, which hosts the Secretariat of the Fund, together with 7 current and cross-sectoral partners of the Fund, stand ready to support parties in the implementation of the plan. We call on parties to support the growth of the Fund, to increase its reach, its impact, to strengthen capacity inclusively in support of the plan. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a quite general intervention, but is the support for this intervention? I didn't hear any changes to the recommendation, but yes, Germany. Thank you. Then we continue with Minamata, followed by UN Commissioner for Human Rights. Minamata 164, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. I speak on behalf of the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. We commend the work of the CBD Secretariat in the development of the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. The interlinkages between health and biodiversity are crucial for the 3 objectives of the CBD and for the overall achievement of the goals and targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Chemical pollution, which is one of the main components of the triple planetary crisis and its impact on people and nature, must be integral elements of the global efforts to mainstream biodiversity and health. Mercury is a highly hazardous chemical and a global pollutant that affects the health of hundreds of millions of people and acts as a contributor to the loss of biodiversity. Indigenous peoples and local communities, and in particular women and children among them, bear the brunt of the health impacts of mercury pollution, with numerous assessments consistently showing that they have mercury levels that are many times higher than the WHO reference level. The consequences are devastating for the current and future generations. At its last meeting, the Minamata Convention COP recognized that indigenous peoples as well as local communities are particularly relevant to mercury pollution, but they also play a key role in achieving the objective of the Convention, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Minamata Convention COP also adopted an indicator to monitor global levels of mercury in vulnerable human populations. The Minamata Convention Secretariat sees the absence of indicators related to the health of indigenous peoples and local communities under Target 22 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework as an unfortunate omission in the monitoring framework for the GBF. In summary, we would like to propose the inclusion in the substance recommendation of further details for the process for improving the monitoring elements for the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, as contained in the enclosure 1 of document substa 26/8, and the integration into the monitoring framework of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We hope that this proposal can be supported by parties, and the Minamata Secretariat will submit this statement in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minamata. Any support for this intervention? Okay. Egypt, no. Was it Egypt? No. Ghana? Gambia. Okay, thank you, sorry. Very difficult to see. What is somebody else? India. Okay, thank you. We continue, the UN Commission of Human Rights 201, followed by IUCN 194.
Thank you, Chair. Healthy biodiversity and ecosystems are a key component of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Healthy biodiversity is also critical for the right to health. For example, medicinal drugs are often derived from natural products, exposure to nature improves mental health, and exposure to diverse natural habitats is necessary for the development of people's immune systems. OHCHR welcomes that the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health reflects these interlinkages between biodiversity, the right to a healthy environment, and the right to health, and refers to indigenous peoples' unique relationship with their ecosystems. OHCHR recommends that the recommendation take note of Article 24 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, concerning indigenous peoples' right to health, including to their traditional medicines, and to maintain their health practices, including the conservation of their vital medicinal plants, animals, and minerals. OHCHR further proposes that paragraph 3C of the recommendation mention a human rights-based approach. OHCHR further proposes an additional monitoring element in Enclosure 1, enabling the tracking of whether the interlinkages between biodiversity and human rights are reflected in domestic policies. OHCHR is available to provide technical support on a human rights-based approach in the context of the implementation and monitoring of the action plan. We have submitted our statement, including the specific textual proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any support for this intervention? Costa Rica, Iceland. Thank you. Then we have IUCN followed by Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. IUCN welcomes and supports the adoption of the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, which provides a useful framework for promoting collaboration with different organizations to mainstream biodiversity health interlinkages into health and conservation sectors. We encourage parties to take a One Health approach that considers health from all perspectives, including human, domesticated, and wild animals and plants, and ecosystems. We would also like to stress that taking actions to prevent zoonotic spillover and disease outbreaks is more cost-effective than responding and controlling them. Addressing drivers of biodiversity loss and habitat degradation can also reduce spillover risk to protect human and wildlife health. The recent impacts of avian influenza on wildlife reinforces the need to monitor and mitigate infectious diseases, as well as other causes of species populations decline, such as toxic exposures. IUCN also notes that nature-based solutions can lead to co-benefits for biodiversity and improved health outcomes, such as the reduction of communicable and non-communicable diseases.
Slow down, please.
Sorry. Better nutritional health, food security, and improved mental health. Chair, IUCN stands ready to support the implementation of actions outlined in the action plan. This includes through capacity building and the provision of guidance, standards and tools to support mainstreaming of biodiversity health interlinkages into environmental policy, NBSAPs, impact assessments, and other strategies and actions, and to promote active participation of wildlife and environmental sector in multi-sectoral One Health coordination platforms and decision-making process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, IUCN. Any support for this intervention? Now, Netherlands is sitting in front. Could you help me? Nigeria, thank you. That's good. Then we continue. We have Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention 155, followed by UN Women 202.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, distinguished delegates, I'm speaking on behalf of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention Secretariat. As you may know, these three legally binding agreements have the main goal to protect human health and the environment from the adverse effects of chemicals and waste. At the last meetings of the VRS conferences of the parties, more than 190 parties voiced support for enhanced cooperation and coordination among MEAs and international organizations. In particular, parties to the VRS conventions welcomed the establishment of the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and requested the Secretariat to explore possible ways for enhancing cooperation. For this, a report is being developed and will be available soon. Regarding the Biodiversity and Health Action Plan, several proposed actions relate to the Convention's programs of work and the technical assistance and capacity building activities that we develop to support BRS parties in the implementation of the conventions. Concretely, an explicit invitation to relevant MEAs and other international organizations to support on the implementation of this action plan, such as in paragraphs 4, 6, and 7 of the draft decision, as appropriate, would be helpful to bring the action plan to their attention and further consider this in their future work. The VRS Secretariat will bring the outcomes of the meeting's consideration of this action plan to their attention, and we stand ready to support parties, the CBD Convention Secretariat, and the WHO as other relevant organizations on this important task. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Our intervention has been sent in written as well.
Support for BRS intervention. Argentina, thank you. Then we continue with UN Women 202, followed by the last intervention, which is 262. UN Women, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving UN Women the floor. UN Women is the United Nations entity leading on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, promoting women's human rights, and also a staunch advocate for the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. UN Women welcomes the draft text under the CBD Substar 26/8 and the revised Global Action Plan, which recognizes the need for the action plan to be gender responsive and acknowledges the roles of women. Our work recognizes that environmental degradation and biodiversity loss are intrinsically interlinked with health inequities, particularly the differentiated health impacts on women and girls. For example, we are looking at the connections between forest loss and the spread of diseases and related care responsibilities, which mostly fall on women and girls as primary caregivers within the households, but also communities due to social norms. Furthermore, and especially in developing country contexts, women's limited access to social protection and health care services continues to affect their livelihoods and well-being, including that of the people they care for. In light of these challenges, UN Women recommends that the Global Action Plan explores the gendered connections between forest loss and unpaid care work linked to increases in vector-borne and zoonotic diseases, increase in water contamination and shortage, which therefore increases time spent on unpaid care and domestic work, such as water collection. Connections between biodiversity loss, such as in forests, marine and coastal areas, and food insecurity and malnutrition. We're also looking at connections between biodiversity loss and mental health ailments, connections between land and soil degradation, and their effects on physical health. And finally, the use of fertilizers and other chemicals that contribute to biodiversity loss and connections with health effects on women and girls, including on sexual and reproductive health. UN Women stand ready to support the further integration of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in the Global Action Plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Support for this intervention? Yeah, DRC, thank you. Then last intervention this afternoon is the Academia 262.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Dixon Wilson. I speak on behalf of Ifakala Health Institute. We welcome the position from Ghana. We welcome that the draft Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health acknowledges the positive contribution of biotechnology tools and complex implication of invasive alien species on biodiversity and health. We urge parties to adopt it at COP16, considering the importance of biodiversity and health nexus. Invasive alien species are responsible for epidemic in human and animal population. For example, mosquito transmit avian malaria, endangering native bird in Hawaii and penguin in South Africa, as well as it transmits human malaria. However, the current action plan does not promote any concrete action, nor does it recognize the limitation of current methods in reversing biodiversity loss and managing health crises. We therefore propose to introduce text calling parties to promote management and eradication measures of invasive species to support elimination of infectious disease affecting animal and human health, including through innovative approaches. We welcome the recognition of potential benefit for biotechnologies in this document, but the current draft neglects the crucial needs for capacity building and additional investment in innovation and research. Therefore, we would ask for the text in Target 13 and 17 to mention support to research and development of innovation for biodiversity and health. COVID-19 has demonstrated the importance of innovation, and we urge parties to make ambitious commitment in this health and biodiversity action plan to ensure that we can end the current pandemic and prevent next ones while restoring biodiversity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Academia. This finalizes this deliberation and first reading on health. Oh, yeah, sorry, support first. I'm already jumping. Burkina Faso. Yes. Are you Burkina Faso? Togo. Sorry, Togo. No, yeah. Sorry. Thanks, that's fine. Okay, this finalizes now our first reading of this on health and biodiversity. And after hearing your intervention, I propose to establish a contact group to work on the elements of the recommendation as well as the Annex 1, the Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, and prioritization addressing technical gaps or missing information. Together with the co-chairs of the contact group and with support from the Secretariat, I will produce a non-paper tomorrow for discussion by the contact group. The group will be co-chaired by my colleague in the Substa Bureau, Yahidul Kabir from Bangladesh, and Mrs. Barbara Engels from Germany. The Secretariat will inform us on the time and room for the contact group to meet tomorrow. Thank you for all your hard work, and this ends this item 9. And then I would like to invite the Secretariat for further information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, I want to just give you a reminder about tonight's schedule. The Friends of Chair meeting on the binary indicator for Target 13 will meet from 5 to 6 p.m. at CR10, which is on the second floor. And Friends of Chair on Target 17 will meet from 7 to 8 p.m. at the same room, CR10. And these two Friends of Chairs meeting will be followed by contact group meeting on item 3, monitoring framework, which will continue its work from 8 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. at the meeting room of CR1. Tomorrow morning, we'll not have a plenary meeting, but instead we'll have a concurrent meeting of two contact groups starting from 10 a.m., one on synthetic biology and the second one on marine and coastal biology, biodiversity. The contact group on synthetic biology will meet at the same room, CR3 and 4, and the one on marine and coastal biodiversity will meet at CR1. We'll meet again as a plenary tomorrow at 3 p.m. to consider conference room papers prepared for item 4. Please check your either CBD event app or schedule in the website for further updates on tomorrow's schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, and the meeting is adjourned.